when the shadows start to fade. There's no spin, no silver soldier, just the echo of what's real today. And I've been waiting for this all my life, to see the light behind the noise. Yeah, I've been waiting for the night to strike. Tailspin rolls, we find our voice. Tailspin on X tonight. No spin, just truth, just lie. You can feel that pulse ignite. At 7 p.m. we rise tonight. There's a hum behind the data, a code that won't lie still. You can dress the truth in makeup, but the light cuts through the veil at will. And I've been waiting for this all my life, to hear the sound that breaks the lie. Yeah, I've been waiting for this fire inside. Tailspin calls and we testify. Tailspin on X tonight. No spin, just truth, just lie. 7 p.m. the storm ignites. Tailspin rolls through the night. Truth don't need disguise, no. No spin, just like
All righty, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tailspin. We have a special guest here tonight. We have Gene Sticco, insider Soviet UFO tech. So between the Cold War history, engineering, and something we still don't fully understand, a set of Soviet-era documents surfaced. Technical detail, not written like a story, but like someone was trying to figure something out, possibly something they didn't build. And the question tonight isn't, is this real? It's, what do these documents actually show? So we have our special guest tonight joining us. Gene is joining us. He's a steward. I'm not even going to try to say the word. I believe it is Russian, so I'll let him explain that to you. But a 119-page Soviet-era technical document described as detailing attempts to understand or reverse engineer some type of advanced craft. Gene is retired U.S. Air Force NCO and researcher whose current work connects these materials to broader programs like the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program and a wider conversation around disclosure. He's also author of a book on conventional, a memoir of his time inside Shell's Oil Corporation intelligence apparatus during the Nigeria crisis. And he's a co-translator of Engineering Infinity and Infinity Disclosure, which I believe is coming out this time this year. I believe it's a documentary. Hopefully, Gene can get into that with us. But a big welcome, big shout out to Gene. Gene, thank you for joining me here tonight to go through your story.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate you taking an interest in having me.
Oh, absolutely. So you want to give us a little bit background about yourself? I know I covered a little bit, and I hope I didn't butcher any of that. And I wasn't even going to attempt to try to pronounce the name of the document in which you became possession of.
Yeah, sure. So the document, the mysterious name, it's actually pronounced Chernoyev. So that he is his full name's Valeris Chernoyev, who is my father-in-law. Um, I guess just touching briefly on the background. Like you said, I started my career. I enlisted out of high school, the U.S. Air Force. I was a nuclear weapons system security specialist. Um, I served primarily, within the Air Mobility Command. I was at U.S. Air Forces Europe, and in Europe, I was a controller for the nuclear weapons storage facilities. So, started out as like a response team member, then eventually became a controller, which means I worked with the flight commander or the flight sergeant to dispatch the forces to respond to any of the alarms, and then oversee the movements of weapon systems and things like that. I spent some time, I worked at Andrews Air Force Base with Air Force One. I was at Dover Air Force Base. I was on essentially the SWAT team. It was called Emergency Services Team. I flew missions guarding aircraft and things like that. And that was sort of my Air Force career. I left in 1999 after having a former boss who had moved into the State Department sort of recommend me for a job with an oil and gas company, heading up security. And the long story short on that, it was quite a few years before I figured out that that was sort of a recruitment into the intelligence community. And that career from 99 until I formally retired in 2017 basically involved contracting inside different, contracting with different U.S. agencies, but working inside international oil and gas companies. The main focus was certainly critical infrastructure protection, but as I categorize it, sort of being a liaison between the company, the nation to which the company was registered or belonged, and then the nations where the company operated. Shell oil is sort of the biggest one, as well as probably the most complex. Um, Shell is Dutch owned. It has part of its major business line in the United Kingdom, and the United States is probably the single most. It had a biggest footprint. Let's say 30% of the company was concentrated in the U.S. And then we would operate in, as you mentioned, Nigeria, Libya, Singapore, Iraq, all over the world. And so my job was to work with those intel and military uh, agencies within those countries and sort of be a go-between the government uh, that the company belonged to, the company itself, and those agencies. Super complex, but I basically retired from that. It took me a few years to sort of back out of things. I was also doing, by the time I retired, I was doing subcontracting on government contracts, but that was all sort of, again, well coordinated and structured. And in 2018, I met Natalia in Latvia. She's became my wife later that same year. We immigrated to the United States. So I lived most of my adult life, I lived outside the United States, even in my post military career. But we came back to the US in 2018 and settled in. By the winter of 2019, we were in the thrusts of immigration paperwork. Natalia's son had joined us over the summer because we let him finish school. So we're getting him involved in school. He didn't speak any English. We're trying to get him involved in programs. And Natalia was speaking with her dad one day, getting him up to speed on what was going on in our new life. He said, we were telling him about our son having an interest in aerospace science, and my father-in-law, had a career in aerospace engineering. And he just said to Nat, "Oh, I'm going to send you some of my old work he might be interested in someday." He sent it, was in an envelope, sat on the kitchen table for a few weeks. Over the course of those weeks, he became ill. And on December 30th, 2019, Nat got word when we got up in the morning that he had died. And in fact, it had been like 17 hours earlier. And he was like already buried. And that was it. So that's the background to that point. Guess I'll just stop there for any questions if you have.
Oh, sorry about the death of your father-in-law. Said you coming upon these documents was, I would consider, fairly recently.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, 2019. So after his death, within a few weeks, Natalia had a dream about him, and anyone can interpret it whichever way, however they want. So Natalia, my wife, is a professional opera singer. She also has a degree in IT engineering. But in this dream, he hands her papers and he says, "I can't help you with singing, but here." So she gets up in the morning, she tells me about the dream. And, again, listen, I, lost my dad. I had dreams about my dad afterwards. And I think that's sort of a very common thing. I don't want anyone getting a wrong that I'm trying to claim a, supernatural connection. But, obviously maybe somewhere there in the psyche, she knew there was stuff she hadn't looked at. And that was the kind reminder to herself, is one interpretation. So we opened the stuff up, started going through it, all in Russian, physics, schematics, typewritten, handwritten, different colored inks. And she's kind of got one pile of them. I've got another pile of them. And, I'm saying to her, "Well, what do you see? What's it say?" And she's like, he's talking about Einstein, and Einstein was wrong about this. And then this galactic stuff. And then the drawings of this UFO looking thing start, appearing as we're sitting there going through it. And I'm saying to her, "Well, what does this say?" And would read it, and she's like, "It says, description of the saucer, technical specifications of the UFO." And I'm like, "Well, is it like crazy? Does it say UFO?" She's like, "Yeah, these three letters are UFO, or this word is the saucer." And I'm like, "The saucer?" She's like, "Yeah." Um, and that's sort of what started the journey at that point, because we, you know they the way I describe it, it's like I can read physics, right? You can hand me a physics book and I can read a physics book, but I can't tell you what it means, right? And she was having the same thing. Like, I'm sitting there staring at her to translate this stuff, and she can read the words and kind of guess, and is trying to explain it to me. um and I was like, "Wow, this is really weird." The first reaction was just, "Well, I wonder if there's anything to this," right? And spent maybe a year or so just reaching out. So we're from the Boston area. So I'm like, "Well, there's Harvard, there's MIT. Surely there must be a Russian speaking physicist somewhere, or astronomer, somebody who can look at this stuff and tell us, is there, is it academically important? Does it look like research? Or, is it the drunken ramblings of some guy and none of it makes any sense? And, I wasn't getting any luck getting a hold of anybody. I'm like, I'll buy coffee, I'll buy lunch, I'll, pay for your office time, whatever. Um, I continue to sort of pursue that. And again, for years, right? Academics. Then I just started going to the UFO crowd. And one of the first things I did, because it was the only show I was familiar with, was Ancient Aliens. And, wrote to whatever names I could find on that. I got an email from Nick Pope, and and I would send a couple of screenshots, of because by that time we had scanned them all in, so then Natalia could kind of try and hand translate them. And Nick Pope wrote back, and he's like, "This looks very interesting. Wish I knew somebody who could help you. Perhaps send them to MUFON." And I got introduced to MUFON. Reached out to them. They were no help, but they were like, but if you want to send them all to us, we'll archive them. And I was like, I'm not comfortable doing that, and I didn't quite get. And I'm reaching out more and more people. Now I'm finding amongst friends who, my friend Mario is all into this subject, and he's like, no, you don't send them to anybody. And he's looking at them, and he's like, there's something here. And like I said, up until so I'll just backtrack for a second. One of the more interesting aspects of what Natalia was able to translate was essentially a prediction. So there's a part of the work where he's talking about human consciousness. And he says, he explicitly writes, in 2024, that humanity is going to go through this sixth gate, or the earth passes through this sixth gate of Orion. And when that happens, 50% of society is going to, there's going to be this conflict of 50% of society between the spiritual and the oligarch and the materialistic, and only half of the population is going to pass through it in 2024, but the rest begin to catch up, and how this is part of human development. And it actually is like beginning in 2020, but this cycle completes in 2024. So as we're sitting there, kind of going through normal life, right, like everybody else, and putting these things, picking them up, putting them down, and me trying a bunch of different things. By the time 2024 hit, I was like, everything we see happening feels a lot like what he's writing about. And I'm like, so if he's right about this, what else does he write about? And that's when I started doing the deep dive on the science and AI. And I was like, all right, let me just extract all the science that's in here. And sort of looked at, okay, so here's all the science. Who works on this kind of science, right? Where does this is it even real stuff that is working on? And all the usual suspects start. But oh yeah, NASA BPP program. That's where I got introduced, to OSAP and ATIP and DARPA and DIRDS and DIA and all of the, and then I started finding the patents and things, and I'm like, hold on, logic would tell me that this random set of documents my father-in-law sent me from Kazakhstan that he wrote shouldn't match anything, right? My full expectation was it's just going to be, or it's going to be like, oh yeah, this is just such and such a theory, but it was like specific, and it was pointing to all of these agencies that, like, I'm hearing are the usual suspects. And that was the point that I was like, myself, Natalia, my friend Mario, I was like, listen, let's translate what we can, or do the best translation we can, and just put it out there, because I wasn't getting responses from anybody. And I'm like, I think there's something here. Let's put it out there, because this is what it looks like. and we'll just kind of see if the public picks it up and somebody knows what to do with it. So I'll stop there. I know I've been talking a long time. Sorry.
No, very, very interesting. So you found these documents. We'll just do a little quick recap. You found these documents. You started looking through. Um, you're trying to translate what they mean. You're starting to go in a certain direction. What was your initial thoughts when you started to look through these things initially, before you got to anyone? Were you like, "Oh my God, this could be something big," or this is tied into some type of UFO program in Russia? Like,
No,
what were you at the time?
what I can you hold it? Can you stop that? What I started noticing was that as I was, now I'm trying to play catch up in 2024 and in early 2025, right? And understand this landscape that's happening. And so what I'm seeing and hearing at that time is, you know, the congressional representatives are looking for all of these answers out of government agencies. The government agencies aren't giving them answers. Everybody's really sketchy and shady and avoiding conversations. That people are, have described all of this phenomenon, and I'm returning to these papers, and I'm like, well, do these explain this phenomenon? Well, yes. Okay, and it has like a scientific, puts the structure around it according to what he has there. And so I'm like, these look like they're somehow able to answer a lot of these questions I hear being asked. And I'll tell you, so like the beginning of 25, like I sent I wrote a letter, I did like a white paper, sent it to, I know I sent it to Mace. I think Burchett was the other one. It was either like Burchett or Burleson. Because again, at that time, I didn't really know who any of these people were. And I was just like, there looks like there's something here. Their structure, it points to these programs. Maybe if you ask detailed questions about these programs, and then, okay, well, why does this Russian document from 40 years ago have some of the same science in it or come up with the same numbers? There was like a DARPA contract that specified this 20 Tesla limit on something. And my father-in-law's work specifically talked about 20 Tesla, and it was around the same sort of general. And I'm like, it's just, there's something there, but somebody who knows something about it needs to look at it, right? Um, and so that was like the beginning of 2025, just sending it out sort of as a concerned citizen. Because the other aspect, as I was looking at things in Russia, we've got Putin talking about weapon systems, plasma, EMP, that use these new physical principles. And again, some of the science, some of the patents, all kind of were adjacent to one another. And I just couldn't explain how it was, kind of getting there, because again, my initial reaction was just figure out, is this a quirky family heirloom, or is there something in there that is like of benefit to science or humanity? Because other things would talk about, again, this would create free energy. Okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe this is like somebody can do something with this. And that was the entire driver behind just putting it out there, and then ultimately I kind of figured, okay, well, nobody's going to run with this in mid 2025, and that's when I popped on the scene.
That's interesting. So um, I guess we can move into what you know now. Do you feel it was more theoretical, or do you think uh, these documents were more like engineering work on how to actually build these technologies?
Sorry, we're go outside. So good question. So I started. So again, I had this Intel background, right? So I tried to exercise a lot of self-discipline and step back from them. So number one, I knew nothing about the UFO ufology subject matter outside of binging Ancient Aliens, right? And so I said, okay, I have these documents, and I set a process for myself. So first it was like, now I had like some familiarity with Russian classified information and what it looked like. These documents didn't have any markings, they didn't have any hallmarks in that way that would give me anything that was concrete. It didn't have a big giant stamp on it or stuff like that. So I started looking at the sort of structure of Russian research and Russian papers, and trying to discern, was there a difference between university type research or government type research? And things were pointing towards more towards government type research in some of the structures, but it was still page numbers were handwritten and things like that. There was one pink piece of paper. This one pink piece of paper within the classification processes of government work, they would use color-coded pieces of paper as a top sheet, and that piece of paper would just be it wouldn't necessarily have markings, but it would be a quick visual indicator of it having some sort of classification level. As I so that was sort of the papers themselves. I looked at things that like dates, right? What's the earliest date mentioned? What's the latest date? When did he go to college? All of these things to try and come up with the time frame in which they would have or could possibly have been written. So it was a process like that, trying to, so I guess falsify or at least find the loopholes to put together a timeline that would make sense, that as I looked at other things, I'd be able to say, okay, what happened first? Could this have happened or been written within, the certain time frame and stuff like that? And then I went into the language itself. So there were some clues within some of the narrative portions of the papers. So he mentions, so the first thing I noticed, and that I asked Natalia to sort of discern, and then I continued discerning as we went through, how much of the language was observational versus being an idea. So things like, oh, I think, it might, it could, it should, blah, blah, blah. Everything was very observationally based. I looked at the depth of detail in some, there are specific measurements, in centimeters and things down to the point whatever. So, didn't read as though these were generalizations or ideas. There were a lot of specifics. There's a part where he referred to um, a video of a much bigger UFO, this sort of mothership size UFO, recently outside of Earth near the sun. So now he's talking about a video that he's observed, right? That he's talking about this video, or at least he's heard of it and has been told the details of this video. Then later on, he references two other papers that he wrote and to the Russian Duma, the Russian Parliament. So during the Soviet period. So he's, reference authors' previous work to state Duma state agency, whatever the dates were, So it's like he's talking about himself now in the third person, referring the reader to get these other papers he's written from the Russian Duma, which is again their parliament, their Congress, that he's submitted to them. So he's previously been submitting official papers of some kind to the Russian Duma. So all of those things collectively give me that high confidence he's working on something involving the government. I'll take a breath there for coffee.
Yeah, please do. So you mentioned he was talking about, I guess, a craft or something approaching the sun. Was that like in reference to the Soho Heliotheric Observatory or something like that?
So the way he describes it again is weird because he's talking about it in terms of its thermonuclear propulsion system, and the actual terminology that he uses is that this craft was flying near the sun and extracting water from the sun. And to me that was kind of crazy talk. But as other people have looked at it, over the last couple of years now and whatnot, they're like, well, he uses water, but he could be talking, in terms of hydrogen, or there is some kind of, um, within the larger context, he's talking about how the sun is or the planets are the children of the sun. This, as the sun flares, and these flares and the plasma goes into space, it freezes, and then it's like that's what's able to be taken as water and turned in used within this propulsion system. So it's like something along that line. And some people tell me, explain it again much more eloquently and intellectually than I can. Um, but that's, sort of the feedback I've gotten on why it's maybe not that insane.
I've seen a couple videos, and I believe, like you said, like a mothership or something like that. These things are huge, almost, I mean, larger than Earth, um, when in proximity to the sun, and it almost looks like it is sucking off plasma or something. And I haven't heard anyone explain it. I'm not an astrophysicist, so I don't really know either. But I have seen video. But Gene, so you started to dip into the UFO community, I guess, here on X while you were trying to get answers and no one was providing them for them before you?
Yeah, I mean, I again, it was mainly doing emails and stuff, and it was my friend Mario's like, just get on X and start connecting with people and trying to find this guy and that guy, and obviously, George Knapp was one of the first names that came up. And between 2020 and 2024, I probably wrote to him 3 times. Um, because everybody kept saying, anyone that I would run into was like, oh, George Knapp, you got to send him to George Knapp. Okay. And but got no reply. And ultimately what happened, and I guess this was probably what triggered the intel guy in me to really start getting into this even more. Um, so as I said, it published them the end of 2024. By June of 2025, I'm like, well, I guess I better do something with these. Sort of nobody's finding them on their own, and the people I've sent it to don't, nobody's replied back. So just expand the audience, and the first thing I actually did was a press conference. So and in the course of setting that up, I had connected. One of the people that responded was the head investigator from MUFON for Massachusetts, and I sent him everything. And by the time the press conference came, he was like, he goes, "This is the UFO find of the century. I'm shocked nobody." And he's going on and on like this is the Holy Grail. This is the Rosetta Stone. I'm like, all right, I that's what you say, right? What I don't know any better. Um, and then around the same time, like on Instagram, somebody posted a video of George Knapp from the 90s talking about the Russian UFO files. So I like remixed the video, and where he's like, oh, it talked about engineering. And I put in one of the screenshots of the schematic engineering drawing. And I was like this, George. And then, like this, like this. And then underneath it said, all I've heard about is George Knapp and these UFO files, and I've been chasing him for 4 years now. To, and again, I didn't need an interview. I didn't need. All I wanted to be, I like a 20-minute conversation or an email exchange that was like, does this look like anything you've seen before? Is this legit? Is it useful? Do you want them? I'd have fucking sent them everything, and nobody would have ever heard of me, right? And after I posted that video, then I got a direct message from them. Oh, never saw your emails. Send me what you've got. Sent them the link. Never heard anything. The guy from MUFON writes to him, George, I understand, da da da. And he goes, I'm curious, but frankly, it's over my head. Okay, do you want to have a conversation? Do you want me to lay out, what you know? And then just shit started getting weirder from there. So one of the I had then so this is June, and then somehow Disclosure Tonight, those guys got a hold of him, I think again through the MUFON investigator, was having conversations with them. They send it to Jared Yates. I'm having a discussion with Jared Yates. So now I've got people who are like, yeah, there's something here. And so by July, I had gotten in touch with Robert Hastings, the author, because again, I'm a former Air Force guy. You like Air Force, sent him everything. And it was a few weeks later, he wrote back and was like, this is way over my head. I sent it to David Grush. He said it was very interesting. He hadn't seen it before, and he'll have a look. So I replied back to Hastings, thank you very much. Here's my, please pass on my email. Here's my phone number. If he can spare a 20-minute phone call, I can let him know sort of where I'm at with these things. But instead, like a week later, the FBI showed up at my house.
That's always a pleasure. Sure.
Yeah, well, and again, it was funny because hearing people's stories, in the community, it's this like intimidation thing. But again, I came out of that world, right? I'm, one of my best friends and colleagues was the former deputy director of the FBI from the Los Angeles office, right? I have hung out, I have partied with all sorts of FBI people, right? Come to my fucking house, I don't care. I'll talk to you. I came out of this world. I grew up in this world. And that's when I was like, no, there's something going on here.
So, why did they show up at your house? Who notified them? I think that was after you talked to David Cross, right?
So they came. I call it a fishing expedition, right? That was the vibe that I got. So there was an FBI program that I was part of back in maybe 2005. And I was part of it maybe until 2012, 2013. And that was the program that they sort of opened the door with. They were like, "Oh, you were a member of InfraGard," and it was like, "Yeah, yeah, what was that all about?" Okay, here's what it was all about. Oh, so what are you up to now? Oh, well, that's why I thought you were here. And then I went through the whole thing. I'm finding this shit. It's really weird. Da da da. So we have a guy in our office who focuses on that, or he really likes it. So, well, give him a call, grab a 6-pack of Sam Adams. We can sit in the backyard and have cigars. I can talk to you about it all day long. I said, but I think there's something here, and I'm trying to reach out and connect with, anybody who, can take this forward and see how it applies, and does it help answer all of these questions that seem to be asked in the way that I'm now figuring out that they do, and they have these connections to. By this time, I identified 75 programs, and again, I've got people like the lead investigator from MUFON, Massachusetts, saying this is the find of the century. I'm just like, I don't know.
So they really didn't dig down into the details of it, I guess, right? Just like you said, a petition to see they could find out more information on you and get a grasp, I guess, of who you are as an individual.
Exactly. I mean, that's what it felt like, because as soon as we started playing the name game, because again, I had lots of names to drop myself, and they're like, "Well, what exactly is your background?" And I went into detail with it with them. Then it was like old home day. It was, like we're all speaking the same language, we're all on the same page after that. All right, you want to start? We can try.
So they sent the X-File team out to see you.
Yeah,
I'm
I
all
mean, again, I don't know if it was sort of a threat assessment, if it was and again, I never said anything threatening or whatnot, but you know, that's all that happened and came of it, right? So it was sort of an event that became, was maybe a non-event, but what it did was, again, it started reinforcing to me that there's something more to this, and there's something going on with this, and the silences and the ghostings were were becoming more and more suspicious to me, because again, you can only be told, oh, send it to so and so, there, send it to George, he's the guy, he would love this, oh, he'll lose his mind. It's like, no, he's not fucking interested in it at all, it seems. And nobody could explain it. And over the period of, over the time and since then, and just getting all immersed in this, and then I got to backtrack for a second. So then I have my FBI visit. That's July 2025. And then I'm starting to do the podcast circuit, starting to share the information and get the story out there. And then comes late August of 2025. And all of a sudden, George Knapp wants to talk about Russian UFO files at this Senate hearing that's coming up. And I'm like, well, that's weird. It seems as though for the last 30 years, he didn't have an interest in his Russian UFO files or telling that story. And then all of a sudden, it was fucking everywhere. And Luna's got to talk to the Russians, and all this stuff happened. And but is that just a coincidence? How does how does that play out? Are they trying to like control the narrative of Russian UFO files? And if they are, why do they not want this narrative being shared? So, every one of them becomes like a new rabbit hole to kind of go down and kind of assess. And the whole time I'm sort of comparing public statements versus personal experience, right? I've got these figures who are talking about being the champions of disclosure, looking for people with evidence. I'm like, I'm a veteran, right? I'm a decorated veteran. I'm a disabled veteran. I, worked in the intelligence community. I was a corporate whistleblower against Shell Oil in a case that went to the UK Supreme Court, right? So like, I've got a little bit of a credential background comparatively to other people coming out in the space. But what started striking me was, but I'm not coming out from inside the government, or I'm not bringing information that is allegedly inside the government. I'm bringing what a complete body of work that I've published. I'm like, and this is much different than the other whistleblowers and the other characters sort of being positioned in the space, and the experts. And again, more and more discussions, podcasts, all the rest of it, investigation and analysis on my part, just started painting the picture like something isn't right here. Words aren't matching actions, and it just seems like they don't want people assessing or looking, or well, and maybe I'm wrong for even saying that. They don't want to amplify the story. Is the bottom line on it, I guess.
No, that's understandable. So you happen to come across these documents that just kind of fell in your lap with like no connection to other than you marrying your wife and what her father-in-law was doing. And then you have a decent pedigree that can be considered, you're not just Mav or Goose up here saying, yo, I've got these documents. You've actually got a pretty strong background, which gives you some credibility on coming forward with these documents. So yeah, I would think as for the intelligence agencies, I think they would take it quite a lot more serious than if, let's say, Goose said, "Yo, my father-in-law gave me these documents, and they look like there's some type of UFO reverse like that."
Yeah, and to my father-in-law's credit, right? So he went to one of the top universities in the Soviet system, part of this Academies of Arts and Sciences network that we come to learn as part of this Thread 3 program. My wife has a professional career, in performance in opera. 7 years with the Latvian National Opera. She masters in engineering herself, so educated, public figure for the most part in the arts. So it's not like we're just, on the one hand, I guess we're random people, but there's a verifiable pedigree, let's say.
Now, and any of those documents are from maybe your wife's memory of what her father did. Was there any clue on who he worked for, where he worked, how he even came across these documents? Was it his work or was it someone else's work?
Yeah, good question. So it was his work. We can confirm it's his work by a couple of things. So first and foremost, Natalia obviously recognizes the handwriting, and the handwriting is consistent through the entire thing. Most of typewritten pages and handwriting. Um, then, and it was, I'll give credit. I don't know if he's in here, but Grider actually found earlier this year, late last year, he actually found my father-in-law's Russian language social media profile from 2012. And it looks like in 2012, he shared all of these documents in sort of a Russian Facebook group. There's a number of discussions that go on around it. So people that seem to have been familiar with the work, seem to know him. There's a lot of political talk in there. He's expressing why he's putting him out there, his anger at Gorbachev, his anger that the that Putin and at the fall of the Soviet Union, they kissed the West's ass and succumb to the West and to the Zionists. And he's going off instead of investing in this stuff, and we should all have free energy by now. He talks about visiting a Soviet nuclear shipyard in 1991. So there's all these little clues in this um, Russian Facebook thing that the only thing he shares on it are all of these documents. And it was something I never found. And it again, Grider's the one who came upon it.
Wow, that's interesting. So he's been putting this out for a while. Um, After you got all this information and then you joined the UFO community, you're starting to get more information, and I'm sure you start looking into what other stuff was out there compared to what your father-in-law had and the documents you currently possess. Have you found anything similar to that type of work?
Yeah. So the things that kept coming up, number one, interestingly enough, were the DIRDs, and that there was something. I know I'm going to get the number. Like out of the 38 DIRDs, there's like 13 of them or something that again the way I can describe it, like these are the engineered solutions to what are written in some of the dirts. So that was the first sort of really interesting connection that, just even still continuing to dive into in depths of detail. The second one were the Pays patents. And there were certain, let's say, we call them scientific fingerprints in some of the formulas and some numbers and things like that. That again, my father-in-law wrote this stuff between 1980 and potentially as late as 2007. That the entire 12 bodies of work could have been completed. But then you go into the 2000 teens and there's some of this stuff in Pace's work. And so I don't want I think people misinterpret sometimes when I make these connections. I am never saying that they stole work. I'm never saying that they looked at these exact papers. I think in the course of the entire history of all of this, and it might include brain drain of Russians that came over to the US, that there is fundamentally something in these papers that hold clues to the transfer of knowledge between Russia and the former Soviet Union and the United States, whether it was official, unofficial, whatever. That's what I think this is indicative of, not trying to position my father-in-law was, a great genius and prophet who wrote this and everybody's stealing it. That is not at all where I'm getting at, because I've also always said I believe this is one part of a much larger body of work, and that's probably what is still within some sort of classified community. And I'm sure elements of these must be, but I just don't know or have visibility or been able to put it together exactly.
Very, very, very interesting. So man, you've been doing this for years. So you're going back to was it 2018 uh, to now, which is crazy. So what is your next step moving forward now?
So, right now, so now we're doing some things like I've actually got uh, two people in Europe, Russian speaking scientists, who are um, taking the original scans. They are creating a Russian language transcription. So they're essentially taking all of his handwriting and symbols and all of this and typing them out, because sometimes, again, people can't really recognize the symbols or handwritings. And I've had discussions with people for an hour at a time over a character and whether the character is a number or a Cyrillic letter, stuff like that. So these guys are doing that from the original scans, transcription into Russian, and then translation into English, which is much more cleaner and consistent than the translation we were initially able to do. And they're doing things like on the diagrams themselves, sort of removing the handwriting and just putting in the translation over the diagram. So it'll be much easier for anybody with a scientific background that wants to tackle anything on it, to sort of follow that line of, you know, that it's the correct notations and things like that. Um, so that's the core work on the documents themselves. I continue to dig into each of, I mentioned 75 programs, just continue to keep digging into each one of those programs to really determine, is it a valid connection or is it just ancillary science? Like they would have come to the same conclusions anyway, just because it's, advanced propulsion or something like that. So continue to work through that. Um, have a little bit of forensic document certification going on, that things like the water markings on the paper, the papers themselves, the typewriter ribbon, the typewriter print, is all, again, age, time period appropriate. So we've already got, like, the handwriting analysis. The handwriting is all the same handwriting. The handwriting is authentic. The pressure, used on pens and shit like that. And then just telling, continue to tell the story, because, I've shared this with lots of people, and again, I don't hide anything, or try and, I don't talk around too much. I sat down with Lou Elizondo for 4 hours, October last year. He looked at he looked at it, and he looked at me and said, "You know what this is?" I said, "I know what it is. Do you know what it is?" He said, "I know what it is. Are you willing to get your clearance back and go into a skiff?" And I'm like, "No, no, I don't need anybody to tell me anything. I have stuff I want to tell you." And, but I guess if there is stuff to tell me, you don't even actually really need to tell me, because you've told me, because you can't tell me, kind of logic, if you want to call it that. Gary Nolan was very generous. We had an hour long these spaces and materials, and just go through them. And so just Mark Falcon Space, those guys look at it. So, I think there's a lot of, reference. Again, nobody's sort of doing the deep dive. I've had, of course, a lot of skeptics and criticism, and the math isn't right, and da da da. And just to answer that question upright, to me, it doesn't even matter if the math's right to a large degree, because the bigger question is, why does any of this exist in the first place, and why does it even match anything?
You're right. And we've already had my buddy Jack has already been in the comments saying the math doesn't work. But Gene, we knew that was coming from the early as soon as it was.
Yeah, I mean, I get it's Russian disinformation, which, again, to what end, right? The path of my father-in-law being a Russian, uh, to send them to me in the U.S. in that he because the fact of the matter is, he didn't really know much about my background when I married Nat. So it was like, I don't know to what end there would be misinformation. People have called me a psyop, and, I'll say, at this point, I, to a degree, there's certain people I want to be a psyop against, and it's nobody who is, let's say, a member proper of the UAP community. It's more these gatekeepers, and, people whose stories kind of don't make sense to me.
No, no, you're right. And what, misinformation or disinformation from the Russians, no one provides us more mis or disinformation about this topic other than our own government. So why would they care if
Well, right. I mean, and that, the more, and every time it comes up again, you sort of got to break down the logic. It's like, so their misinformation. So they handed off misinformation that actually matches U.S. government programs. So how is that misinformation when it's confirmed, or it's at least the same types of things that the U.S. government had been investing in over the last 30 years?
I'm gonna ask you, I got two more questions for you, Gene. Then I'm gonna ask you if there's anything that you think's important that we didn't cover, and then see if anybody wants to come up to speak. So if anybody wants to come up and ask Gene a question, uh, put the request in, we'll bring you up. Uh, but Gene, prior to you get receiving these documents and then you finding the documents and reading through, how has this changed how you think about the subject matter as a whole with uh, time travel, physics, the whole UFO phenomena? Has it changed you?
I mean, a little bit. So, I would say before this, I was totally open to it. I was like, yeah, of course, there's got to be life somewhere else. I have no doubt. Again, I worked in government long enough to know there's all sorts of shit that's kept secret, and there's all sorts of diversionary techniques. And so, I always quote, it's a former State Department employee from the Vietnam era who said, whatever conspiracy you can come up with in your mind that the United States government is pursuing, the truth is 100 times worse. And my experience definitely says, that is a true statement. Um, I think what changed most is like the the longer I've lived with these and dove into certain areas and aspects of them, things like the concept of time is very different to me now. I don't think of time as linear anymore. Or, and it's somewhat intentional, right? Like I'm trying to get my mind around a lot of these concepts. So I, try to act and think with intention within the framing of how time is addressed various ways throughout these documents. Um, and then just listening to all of the witness statements, testimonies, all the stories, the experiences, and going back to these works to kind of in a way sense check them or understand the framework of what I hear people explaining. And that begins to inform, for me at least, like solidify some answers for people around these things. The problem is people don't want to hear those answers because they're like, oh, this is what I know because it's what I experienced. And to be like, hey, I did a little bit of work on this and I can give you some structure around that. And you're kind of right, but for the wrong reasons. And, nobody wants to hear that shit.
One last question for you, then I'll let you speak about anything you think it's important that you want everyone to hear. Um, what was the most shocking revelation that you've experienced, one with the documents and then going through this whole process over the last several years?
Good question. I guess the most shocking revelation, I guess, is the real it is. So, and again, I'll probably get crucified because everybody's got their ideas on things. The most shocking conclusion, what I often try to do is use the documents and let them lead me to the answers, right? So, not trying to prove anything, but just follow and use the information to do calculations and go backwards and forwards and all the rest of it. And probably the most shocking conclusion that was reached is about humanity. And so my assessment, what I got out of these is that the NHI that we're talking about, that non-human is actually incorrect. That these are a more advanced branch of humanity. That they actually are humans. They're not future humans. They are an entirely other. We are a branch off of them from probably about a 500,000 years ago. Um, Again, working out the math, and so that's probably the sort of most shock. I mean, for myself, changing wise, I can't say there's I'm looking at that just to, I mean, I don't think there's like much about me that's, I've certainly learned a lot more about fucking physics. And
Made you smarter.
yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little smarter in some ways that way. Like I didn't even, because there's people like you could have written that. I'm like, I will show you my high school trip. I graduated high school senior. I couldn't even, I failed algebra 2, and they had to give me they gave me a photocopy of my diploma in the thing when I walked the stage, because I still had to do summer school to pass algebra. So anyone who thinks I'm a fucking physicist, I will, unless I suddenly became an expert, I guess, over the last 30 years while having careers and family. Um, but I'm still not. Obviously, you can probably hear it. So, I don't think it's like fundamentally like changed my world. I don't feel like people have asked me, "Oh, do you want to see it?" I'm like, I don't feel like I need to see it. Like, I'd love to, yes, but like, I'm not going out of my way for it. Like, it's not going to change what I do every day. One pops down, or somebody says, "Hey, we're going here, and we're going to see one." Maybe, but um, I feel very resolute, I guess, in the idea that it exists. It's being hidden. I think it probably has a lot less interest in us than we do in them. But again, that's just sort of, where I've landed after spending time in all of this and doing what I've done with it. And that's exactly why I put it out there, because anybody else can do the same thing. Every page is out there. Have at it. Come to your own conclusions. All I tell people is this is what I've found with it.
No, I like that. I kind of think the same way. I try to keep my mind open because let's face it, no one truly knows exactly what this stuff is, and the ones that do aren't telling, right? So we get bits and pieces from experiencers, from different people, from what they've been exposed to, maybe in their career, overheard secondhand, but no real solid proof that you can say this is exactly what it is. And I think that's where a lot of people make a mistake when you go down that chimney, and you're not gonna veer or take anyone else's thoughts into consideration. I think you're doing yourself wrong, because we don't gotta
Can
talk.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
Yeah, yeah. So I was just going to say, exactly. I run into that a lot. Like somebody wrote me one day, they're like, this is bullshit. The aliens told me it uses this. Like, okay, you know, I'm not, I've never tried to put this forward as this is the definitive Bible on how, all I'm saying is I haven't seen anybody, even with the dirds, I've never seen anyone else that's put the level of detail to the phenomenon that is internally consistent, that is spread, and it has that much detail, and that even explicitly, like he writes in there at one point, he says he goes through this whole thing and he said, but this is 22nd century technology. Like we don't even have the tools yet to do the things to measure what he's detailing, um, to even falsify it. So there's like some stuff that could be falsified right now. Somebody told me, oh, it'd take like $40 million and we could build a facility to do. Okay, let's get the 40 million and do it. I don't know what to tell you. And there's stuff that maybe, but for a bunch of stuff that was written 40 years ago, and some of it, again, 40 years ago, you could say was pseudoscience, but now it's mainstream science. And so for the stuff people still sit there and say, oh, this is pseudoscience, it's like, well, 40 years ago, this, and this were pseudoscience too. So don't know what to tell you, buddy.
it's so true. As far as things that advance and you would think was pseudoscience. But one question from something you had said, that you believe that these are advanced humans, which made me think of a video that's been going around on X with Amy Eskridge talking about those. I think she said the same thing, that these are advanced humans, and she called them P-48s and P-52s based upon how much longer they've been here and that they may have survived, I guess, underground or some type of catastrophic event. I mean, a doomer type scenario. Doomer was in here,
Yeah.
but there were some that advanced underground, and their technology advanced much further, even though there were some who still survived on the surface, and their advancement was, not as quick. How did you come up with that's what you believe these things are, that they're advanced um human?
So there's a good amount. So, like I said, there's 12 works, right? So there's like 3 or 4 of them that are dedicated to what he calls the tripartite nature of human consciousness. Excuse me. And then he he interconnects civilization, the development of civilizations, and human consciousness, and the advancements and stages of human consciousness. And this is where that 2024 prediction part came in. And in his charts and graphs, he talks about these major cycles, the cataclysmic cycles, this rotating through the Orion system. There these macro and micro periods. So he goes through, there's like 8 years of this, and 16 years, and 32 years, and then there's 26,000 years between this and that, and then there's the catastrophic thing every 6,000, and blah blah blah. So essentially, again, using AI, I said, all right, well, let's work this backwards, um, from what he detailed, because again, so he's talking about like the fall of the Soviet Union, right? Well, obviously he lived through that. And he talks about the fall of the United States, like starting in 2026, and the fall of the European Union, or the fall of the European Union starting in 2026, and the fall of the US starting in 2027. And essentially, this cycle that it goes through is like by 2035. It doesn't mean the nations aren't going to exist anymore, but the power structures and sort of the civilization and how we think of civilization in these terms is what changes. So it's like, so he's got the Soviet Union. So everything up through there, I have to throw out, right? Because, well, he knows that. He knows this is what's happened. Anything in the future, I don't know. We don't have, I can't answer. So all I could do is try and take the math and work it backwards, and take these cycles. And so, I just sort of continued to run the cycles backwards. And did they work out if you took them backwards to known historical periods and development, and all of that? And they did. And so then I had to apply this concept of time, right? That time, so I had to forget time as we know it, as this linear man-made construct that is how we feed ourselves, and plant food, and all of that. I have to throw that out the window, and I have to go with what he talks about as time being cyclical, and that it's like that now we are riding time like a wave, but there are still undercurrents, and that there is no past and future. There is only the present, and all things occur within the riding of the wave, and everything else is still occurring in these undercurrents, which then got me into interdimensional shit, and all the rest of it. But that's beside the point. But when I looked at time differently, then the and then also using the evidence, right? The actual evidence of why would somebody else want to look here? Well, we are the only habitable life form in the galaxy, so maybe we are unique. But there are also periods when Mars and Jupiter, Mars and Venus were habitable. And so, I went through this whole thing of, okay, is there a period of when those might have overlapped if we are not on our human linear time scale, but on the cyclical thing? And then it continued to go from there. So that's how I got there.
Definitely interesting. I mean, those are really, the different options we have, either a separate advanced civilization that's hidden. We have visitors from other solar system or planets. We have interdimensional beings uh, from other planets or even from Earth. I guess they call them ultra. Uh, dim- and then we have the good old angels and demons, right? From the Old
Yeah,
Testament.
and and I went through and tried to figure out, well, where would this craft come from, because he talks about things like the Orion system, and then there's all the I guess all the schematics of the craft and everything. It's like, well, where could this come from? Where could the materials for the craft that he describes have been made if they were not made on Earth? Where, all of these sort of questions, and putting it in the whole context with the, my we are a branch of a more advanced line of humans. It actually all pointed to the Jovian system in Jupiter, is sort of where I landed on using it through that. And I've heard some things about Jupiter and one of the moons or a couple of the moons or whatnot. So it like doesn't. I guess my thing with it is that it's never taken me somewhere that is totally outside of something that's already floating around in the community, in the discussion, and in the discourse and all the rest of it. Which again, for things that were written 40 years ago, and a lot of this stuff, sometimes not having been popular, and the fact he was in the Soviet Union behind the Iron Curtain, right? There's no internet. There's no fucking Life magazine, the National Geographic, and Popular Mechanics and shit like that. I find it quite extraordinary, again, that it should match anything.
Yeah, it's so true. And even Hollywood and movies, right? So you're right. It's like being in a box room with no window. They come up with something similar that's going on in the other room. As if anyone would like to speak, please grab a mic and come up. If not, we're not going to go that much longer. But if you have a question, by all means, please grab a mic, request up, and I'd love to have the interaction or questions you might have for Gene. Gene, my last question for you is, what do you have going forward? I know you're working on a documentary. I believe you're an executive producer on, putting some. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So so again, just taking feedback, from lots of people. So the what I published, Engineering Infinity, right? That is, it's a boring book, right? It is literally the scan and the translation of the scan. It is not a story. It's it's not an interpretation. There's a little bit where we try to explain things here and there, but for the most part, it's here's the papers, here's the translation, and the purpose of that is, if you've got the time and background, go for it. See what you come up with, right? See if you can figure it out, because that's all I can do, right? Just put it up, take the evidence, put it out there, and run with it. So if people, again, I hate to be critical of the same people I'm trying to make an appeal to, but for a large extent, a lot of people just want stuff spoon fed to them, right? And they don't actually want to do any work. They just want it. And so I wrote what's essentially a treatise, called Infinity Disclosed, which I summarize each of the 12 works, and then I talk in detail about the relationship, particularly to OSAP, because that, and the DERDS, because that's the closest one. And an offshoot of that is trying to tell the story in video form, because again, only so many people tune into spaces or tune into any particular podcast. So if we do a documentary where we can tell the story, lay it all out there, you can hear directly from other people besides me who have been diving into this. Um, So we're hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll have a date that's going to come out. Excuse me, a friend of ours, Arthur Wahlberg, who's the oldest brother of Mark Wahlberg and Donnie Wahlberg. He's been a good friend of ours for the last few years. He wanted to get involved, so he's actually going to narrate the documentary. And so it's not only going to tell the story, but it's also going to again lay out what's what's falsifiable now, like what can we actually prove right now versus what is the conclusion of the investigations, and where we do have these gaps, what is it that we're looking for to close those gaps, in the hope that somebody sees it and has something that can close that gap.
That's Wahlberg's going to be narrating part of it. That's awesome. Congratulations on that. Congratulations on your documentary as a whole, and thank you for all the work you're doing on your own to bring this information out to everyone. 'Cause I think it's very important. You didn't have to do all this. Obviously, there's a lot of work behind it, and without people like you bringing out truth, I think there'd be a lot less information available for the rest of us. I don't know if Goose has a question for you, Gene, and then we'll go to Galactic and Susie.
Hey, what's up, dude? Nice to meet you. Yo, I just kind of just because of the relevance of the time at the moment, and I know you were talking about it earlier with like the nuclear propulsion or whatever. Um, do you think that there and sorry if you did cover this, is there an in between the propulsion and anti-gravity?
Yeah, well, so I'll explain my understanding of how the craft operates, and because there's probably other questions about that or whatnot, so we'll just try capture it all. So the way he has it laid out, there is a central compact thermonuclear reactor. That thermonuclear reactor uses deuterium, heavy water, and pushes it through these when the thermonuclear reactor reaction occurs, it creates plasma that is fed into a 32 solenoid array that, by those solenoids spinning, help create both the gravitational and the magnetic fields of the craft. Then the craft is actually operated, and I'm sorry, so the craft is built essentially in two pieces. The plasma is contained by the materials of the craft itself, so it essentially forms a skin over the craft. All of that creates this magnetic and the gravitational fields. Then the third aspect of the piloting the craft is the interaction with the consciousness of the pilot in what he describes, he calls the information energy field. So the craft, so the pilot having this level of consciousness that allows them to interact with this information energy field, the craft then moves through the ether to compress the space between the craft itself and the target destination. And that occurs essentially at the speed of thought, is the best way I can describe it. I don't know if that answers what you were asking, but I figured maybe it's in there somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's you answered it and gave me a little bit more. That's freaking insane. Holy moly.
I know. That's what, like, that's why everybody, again, that I know that has done the deep dive into this sits there just kind of bewildered, like, how come more people aren't doing a deep dive into it? I'm like, it's like, I just got to keep, and again, I don't know if it's the universe, whatever, right? Like, all of this happened. I was retired, right? I retired in 2017. We got married, we come to the US. I was sort of running the business side of Nat's opera career. I was writing an opera. like I had nothing else to do, and then this shit dropped on my lap, and again spent those years. But now when I was like getting kind of angry about it to a degree, I'm like, all right, I got nothing else to do, and you gave me all of these skills, U.S. government, to figure shit out. You know, okay, I'll do it.
It's amazing how life sometimes throws things in your lap when you least expect it. Or you could call it
Yeah,
That's insane. I'm for sure gonna be waiting for that documentary, man. I find this all very, very interesting. And just like Mav said, we need people out here doing the work, putting in the work, and actually sharing the truth that is being found.
yeah, thanks for that.
Because if we just believe the people in charge of us, they're just going to BS us all. You know what I mean? So
Right.
appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for all your work.
No, thanks, guys. And you know, I mean, this is like my message to everybody, right? Again, you know, not to say that this is the definitive, or like as it's been described, the Rosetta Stone or Holy Grail or any of those things, but you know, it's a utility, right? It's a benchmark, and this is the way I use it, and how I suggest it's used. It is a benchmark in time that between at least 1980 and maybe as you know, maybe as far as 2007, this body of work was put together. So you can look at what's happened before, and you can look at what's happened since. You can look at how fast things moved before that period, and how fast and how in-depth investment has been made after that period. And that's what I keep saying. Something happened in that period on this issue that there have been exponential leaps, there have been exponential advancements, and you know, using this as a benchmark into these other programs, that our representatives should be asking. There are better informed questions that they could be asking about specific programs that would actually potentially put CEOs or, you know, administration secretaries, you know, that they would actually have to risk perjury if you phrase the question the right way, to get them to answer it. And so that's why I call, and if you heard me in any other space and me going off about any number of figures in the community and all the rest of it, it's only because I look at this and I use this as this kind of benchmark to measure against, to be like, something holds water or something doesn't. And never mind my intelligence background, you know, of how to figure out when shit makes sense or not, right? And how to assess things. And there's a lot of things that just don't make sense, from what the public narrative is.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Goose, for that question. Next we have Galactic.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Yeah, I don't have long to speak, probably a couple minutes, but I just want to say that Gene's awesome. I've had him on many times on the podcast talking about his father-in-law's work, and we've had scientists that have been on our podcast that have said that that Gene Sticco, his father-in-law, would have been considered one of the Nikola Teslas of the time, that he would be considered that level of intellect, because they're going by the work, and you look at the work and you say, okay, can this happen? Well, don't think about what things could happen today. You're thinking about, he wrote this, you know, way back when, you know, think about it back then. Could what he is thinking about happen? Yeah, absolutely. And that's what people are thinking about it, and they're like, oh, yeah, I can do this work. I can do it. Yeah, you can do it today, but can you do it back then when he did this work? That's the different story that nobody's asking. But yeah, I just wanted to put that in there, that I've had a couple people, real high up, scientists, Dr. Andrew Morgan, NRG Scapes Lab. He works with the Australian Space Agency over there. He looked at it and said that he was one of the ones that said his father-in-law would have been the next Nikola Tesla of that time. So that's just the only thing I wanted to put in there. But thank you for having me up here.
Hey, thanks, Jay. Yeah, if I could just add on that, I had somebody else say to me, because I was like, the question comes up, well, how do you know he was reverse engineering a UFO, right? Because it doesn't describe anything about the background of what he's observing. Again, there's those measurement factors where I lean towards he would have had to have been observing, but certainly concede maybe it's a photograph, maybe people gave him those measurements from something else as a distance, right? I can't prove that he had hands on the craft itself. But in asking that question, somebody said to me, they said, he either reverse engineered a craft or he's a prophet. Which one is easier for you to believe? Right? Those are like the two choices they gave me.
That's actually like a ridiculous comment they would even say. Like, how do you know he reverse engineered when he's got the schematics, he's got all the data, he's got all the measuring. It'd be like back in my career where I'd respond to a fatal accident and I would have the diagram and they'd be like, well, do you have proof that you were at the scene of the crash? Well, here's the diagram, right?
Right, but
It's
prove you were there.
pretty obvious.
Okay, I get, but fundamentally, you can't prove you were there. Somebody could have given you photos and have done the measurements for you, right? So that's why I said, listen, I'm happy. And as I tell everybody, I welcome every thoughtful challenge, question, discussion. It's when, and listen, and I've had it out with a couple of like legit scientists, physicists that people know, but it's they like look at a number and they go, oh, that's impossible, and that's just ridiculous. And I'm like, you're being intellectually and academically disingenuous. No, no, I'm not. That just doesn't match. And I say, well, maybe it wasn't built here. If it wasn't built, it's that whole thing, like this expectation that if somebody as a academic didn't come up with the formula, or it's not already part of accepted and settled science, that you expect when whatever lands on the White House lawn, that you're going to get your fucking craftsman toolkit and walk up to it and everything's going to make perfect sense to you. I'm like, you are being disingenuous as a scientist and as an academic. If you look at a number and say, no, that's impossible, without anything else, any other context and whatnot.
No, that's a good point, Gene. I always think back to, I think it was Eric Weinstein was talking about Bob Lazar and how some of his testimony is not scientifically accurate. And I remember sitting there thinking, and he brought it up. So if someone told you they witnessed this guy use a sawzall and he cut a wedge out of a tree, and then he went on the other side of the tree and dropped the tree so accurately it landed on a quarter, they'd be like, "That's a bullshit story. No one uses a sawzall to cut down a tree. They use a chainsaw." And he's like, "Exactly, but he was not a physicist." So obviously he heard a story that was accurate enough to make sense, but maybe he was wrong on some of the terminology. And that always sticks in my.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I've sort of looked at the Bob Lazar story, and um, you know, what is sort of a lot of what Bob describes, outside of the element 115, whatever it is there, like it's pretty much, par for the course, like with what's in my father-in-law stuff. So I tend to believe, yeah, he saw something. Now, where I have bigger problems with the whole Lazar story is essentially like, and again, I only learned the details of his story when this S4 documentary came out, and I watched that, right? Otherwise, I kind of knew the name, kind of knew stuff he had talked about. But, when I heard like he spent 5 months there, that's where I'm like, all right, maybe he saw a replication craft that was based on something else. Maybe I don't, there's certain aspects of things, again, from my time in government that just inform my opinions and assessments. So I tend to think, yeah, he kind of had exposure to something. I don't think it was necessarily the actual original things. It might have been some derivative, some pieces might have been. That's just where I landed with it. Not to go down that rabbit hole, though. Sorry.
No, that was fine. I think Susie was up next, and then we'll go to UFO intros, and then Groove. Sorry, Groove.
Hey, thanks, Mav, and thank you, Jean, for sharing your story. I sense your genuineness. I also appreciate your persistence in continuing to put this out there. I mean, it's really awesome, and I have a question for you here in a moment, but I just want to share a little bit of, I love how the document and how it helped you understand time, because I sense it that way. I actually sense it more of stacked on top of each other. It's all happening at once. It's just, what frequency are we going to interface with? But that also brings me to the interfacing with the craft. I've had that vision and meditation and all kinds of stuff. I'm more of an experiencer. I mean, I understand science and things like that. I've actually created something that came to me. I don't know. I haven't proven anything, but that is what they do. I don't know. And I love also the con that they advanced humans. And so, but again, I really appreciate you so much, your openness. And I also found it interesting that your father-in-law nonchalantly gave that document, to your son or your child. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then your wife had the dream and then he passed. It was like this in as he spoke of consciousness. I think that's the ticket. It's our consciousness. But
Yeah.
and then the US breakdown, all of that, it's like we're all moving into a different direction. But my question really was for you is about your wife. I mean, she was raised by this man, and he gives us information. She had to interpret the information. And so did she know this about him, or was he secretive? I mean, was it a surprise to her at all, or
Yeah. So, good question. So, you got to remember, when she was about 5 years old, is when the Soviet Union collapsed and everything changed. So, 1991. So, there was obviously, and he graduated the Riga Civil Aviation Academy, a part of the Academy of Arts and Science, in 1981. So we got about 11 years there. And then, as I said, she was 5, 6 years old when the Soviet Union collapsed. So as a small girl, she remembers things like taking trips to Moscow. She remembers him having a friend who was the daughter of an ambassador who would play music and piano and stuff with Natalia. She was always musically inclined and all of that. So now her understanding of his career or his work was that he was a plumber. And he was a plumber who would go to Moscow, and he's a plumber who would go to Kazakhstan. But he was also a plumber who would go to the the university in Riga, and worked that. And he was a plumber who would like fix the old ladies, plumbing in their apartments around where they lived and stuff like that. She remembered finding a pass for the Duma, for this Russian parliament in Moscow. And like, why does a plumber have a pass to go? So similarly, it's like some plumber in Portland, Oregon has a pass to the U.S. Capitol building. Like, why would they have some plumber from Oregon go into the Capitol to do plumbing? There, as this came, as pieces started emerging more and more, things that she experienced and saw as a child started, making more sense. So she remembered like hearing about from her dad's friends in university about like he stopped living in the dormitories and was put into a private apartment. Again, Soviet Union, why would they put him in a private apartment as opposed to letting him be with everybody else in the dorms? Her family, she would always say, she's like, oh, my family had no problem with the Soviet Union, right? The adults and her dad, they loved it. They thought that the Soviet Union was the greatest thing in the world. And she had great clothes, and they had a nice apartment, and they had a car, and they had, never experienced hunger. Whereas like her friends had, knocks on the door and people disappear in the middle of the night. So, that experience now in the context of all this, like, is starting to make a lot more sense.
Or he was one hell of a plumber.
Yeah, and it's for, we're in the car, so she just said, so her mom also, kind of fed the gnat in her later years that her father was just crazy and things like that. And she does remember, like, though he never like obsessed over UFOs and aliens, he always spoke with certainty about it. And one of the other things that sort of came together during this whole process was that prior to Natalia being born, he lived and worked in a closed military city in Kazakhstan in the years before Nat's birth. So stuff like that, which again, trying to find the documentation takes boots on the ground in these places, and for any number of reasons is super sensitive and somewhat risky if we're talking about what we're actually talking about, to try and make some of these inquiries. So we're doing what we can on a lot of those fronts.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Gene. Go ahead, UFO intros, and then we'll go to group.
Yeah, Mav, I want to thank you for this interview you did with Gene. I think you hit all the really important points. I have a lot of respect for Gene. I think just even as a member of the community, he has a really unique background and I guess insight on a lot of things, frankly, that you hear people in UFO spaces kind of speculate about or pretend to know about. And some people do, have resumes in this stuff and know some stuff. But Gene really like, I feel like he brings a lot to the topic generally. But I just wanted to say, so I experience, I interview, I interview experiencers and researchers on the topic. I'm now over 100, and I see people down in the listeners. I've interviewed Fringe. I interviewed back in May of 23, right, over 3 years ago. And out of 100 interviews, I've only had like 3 spaces just vanish. And I interviewed Gene last November, and I want to say within a month and a half, that recording was gone. And this is a glitchy space, right? And sometimes someone will be talking about whatever it is, right, in a space, and then their mic goes out, or they rug, and it's like, oh, well, then the feds got him or whatever, right? It's kind of a joke at this point, but some people actually like believe like, oh, whenever I talk about this, it kind of goes haywire. And who knows? Like maybe that's a thing. I tend to not read into things like that. That said, I think the fact that Gene's story, um, a lot of Americans who are like into ufology, I mean, Gene spoke to this in this space, but they're kind of reluctant to like explore his story, right? And it's because a lot of the things we're seeing on this topic coming out now, the Soviet Union also like was onto, right? But in my opinion, like Gene's story in itself, and I don't know why my space went missing, but I do think it's weird that like his vanished that quickly, and it is only one of just a few, right, out of 100 that just vanished. And so I'm not reading into it. I'm not saying exactly that's what happened, but I do think there's kind of an incentive or a motive for a lot of what we call ufology here in the United States or in the West, I guess you could say, um, to like give credit to all this to the United States, right? Even though the Soviet Union was actually on top of a lot of this, and in some cases maybe ahead of us. And I don't know how quite to say this, but there are very few things in ufology that you can point to and call like evidence, right? This isn't quite proof, but in a way, this is like some of the strongest secondhand evidence. Not my space disappearing, but just the fact that like they're prominent, like American ufologists or people just passionate about the topic, right? Who just will not give Gene the time of day. They won't even like entertain his story, right? I mean, to me, that kind of screams like, I'm not saying every one of these people is a Fed, right, or part of a psyop, but it does kind of show like a lot of the things we're seeing right now coming out, right, and being credited to whoever it was back in the day, Townsend Brown, or you know what I mean. That these things that we're discovering here in the United States as this topic comes out of stigmatization, a lot of it you can find in Gene's father-in-law's documents, and why is that? That to me, that's almost secondhand evidence that there really is something here. And I don't know if Gene wants to speak to that or make, just concisely like why his
No, I think
father-in-law's documents kind of pose a threat to the powers that be here in the United States.
so. Yeah, no, thanks for all that and all the kind words. Appreciate it. You know, there's I hate I hate to call it out, but there is one thing I'll call out that nobody's done and nobody's ever challenged that I've, I figured people would have jumped on right away, and nobody has done it. And it goes back to, and Kimball, and you know my history, you know about my meeting with Lou Elizondo, you know the fallout, of that, was public, and probably where I think as a result of that, how we even got introduced, right? And I'm very public. We chat, we send messages, again, just sort of, veteran to veteran shit, not even related to you. I like him as a person, as a fellow veteran. I understand all of the positions on him and his work and all of that, right? And I've mentioned again Gary Nolan. What I've noticed is nobody's ever asked them. Nobody's ever said, "Hey, I understand you had this meeting on such and such a date. What do you think?" And if you notice, they've never offered up anything on it.
You mean in like a
Which again,
public setting, probably, right?
yeah, I mean, to me, I just figured that was going to be like one of the first things is like, well, Gene says this is this, and is he going to say what I said, or does he have a different story? And if he does, that's probably going to cause a problem between us. But, you know, ask them. He seemed to recognize what these things were, right? Offer me, do I want my clearance back? He was going to run it around the Intel community. And believe me, I saw the traffic from Intel community adjacent locations, hitting the website in a blast for a period after that. But I never got the, okay, we're setting up this meeting, we're doing whatever. And then I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll just fucking talk about it then. Because again, I am going off of, I'm going off my ignorance as an American patriot, that I believe the officials in my government are really seeking answers. And so I'm not trying to hide any of those answers, not only from them, but from the public itself too, because if we're talking about transparency and we're demanding it of the government, then I think those of us that are bringing things forward need to be equally, if not more, transparent and more available and more accountable to an extent. And it reflects a lot of my criticism of other figures and their seeming inability to make themselves both available and or accountable for things that they say, do, or put out or share.
Real quick, Gene, can you just break down for us normies, like, and I'm not trying to cast shade on Elizondo, right? He's brought plenty of that on to himself, but like, him like asking if you wanted your clearance back, like to like push, I guess, your father-in-law's papers here, like further, like why, like, what made you apprehensive? Like, can you just break it down mechanistically, like why that was not a good thing for you to do?
Well, yeah. So again, my purpose in putting them out was to get answers. So interpretively to me, the offer was, do you want your clearance and we'll get you in a skiff and we'll get you answers, which meant if I did that, then the public aspect of this and the bigger answers that perhaps are available then go into a skiff, right?
Well, and whatever you
And
reveal in that
that's
skiff would be classified, right? Isn't that kind of the...
correct. So, and so in that, and again, it was instinctual, right, to a degree, but it's only because of my experience I'm sort of able to process that stuff really fast in real time and in the consequences of it, blah, 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 where, that was actually a decision point for me. Are the answers for my family more important than the greater answers that I am guessing or assessing are included in this document, these documents for humanity or disclosure and all the rest of it? And so my thing was, we want the family sort of issue, right? With the family closure of who was really Nat's dad and what was he really doing and what's his contributions, and oh my God, did he really do something great in life and will go unrecognized for it? Is that more important to me than there's something in here to advance humanity? And I went with humanity.
So, I mean, put like really briefly, like someone asking you to go into a skiff, right? Get your clearance back, go into a skiff and talk about this was essentially probably the United States government's attempt at bogarting whatever your father-in-law's papers reveal, right?
Doing that certainly would have exposed me to a number of situations that if they didn't want me talking about it or diving in anymore or sharing what I've done anymore, and put the brakes on where I was at that time, that was certainly a possibility that would have been a consequence of doing that.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you again, Gene. And thank you, Matt.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. We lost Gru, but we'll go to Miss A. Welcome, Miss A.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Scott. And hello, Jim. Um, so, Jean, apologize if I missed this and if it was already covered. But when you were speaking about your issues with the government and all of that, what time frame was that? Like, what time frame did that happen in?
I'm sorry, you were kind of a little bit muffled. Can you just repeat that? What?
Yeah. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Now? Okay. So I apologize if I missed, if you covered this already, but you were speaking about your issues with the government. And I was just wondering what timeline was that in, or what time frame rather?
So the my first interaction was the FBI visit to my home was in July. I think it was July 23rd. It was like the Saturday right around there. That was July 23rd, 2025. And that's the only quote unquote official interaction with the government that I've had. Everything I mean, I met Lou back in October last year, but prior to, again, really getting vocal, or when I was starting to get vocal, was that uh, July 23rd, 2025.
So, so you were getting involved with, or well, your contact rather was with Lou in 2025, and that's your contact with the government?
No, I had just published, so the week somewhere around July 18th, or I'm sorry, like July 8th. I'd have to go back and look at the dates, but within a week or two before the visit is when I was told that David Grush had been given this work by Robert Hastings, or Robert Hastings said, "Oh, I sent this to David Grush. He said he hadn't seen it, looked interesting, blah, blah, blah." Then the weekend afterwards, I get a visit. And then the end of August, we're talking Russia UFO files getting announced for the September hearing.
And that was 2025.
Correct.
Okay,
So
cool.
if yeah, somewhere down low, let's say you'd have to go back to that time frame. Right on my Twitter feed or my X feed, like I have copies of the emails and with the dates and all that stuff. Sort of posted all the screenshots of those communications. I get all the receipts. Let's say.
No. And cool. Thank you for answering. I was just like, I've been popping in and out, and when I came in, you were talking about like when you were having issues with the government, and I just wanted to like, get those points set in my mind, like what time frame you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, listen, as of, it'll be on June 11th, this coming June 11th, I'll have been sort of in this community or pushing this for 1 year. So all this has really transpired over the last 10 months now.
A lot has happened over the last 10 months.
And as some people have pointed out, for the, number one, okay, yeah, so it's putting the effort into it, but for the attention that I've gotten to be ignored in 10 months kind of says something too.
Sometimes no reaction or answer is the reaction or the answer. Thanks, Mav.
Thank you, Miss A. Before we go to Susie, I just want to announce pinned up top, I got another guest tomorrow for our space at 7 p.m. on Tailspin. We're going to have Greg Renchick, who supposedly worked at S4 and was security in some of the underground dumps, the deep underground military bases, and encountered alien beings, including greys, reptilians, and also, believe it or not, werewolf type beings. Um, and his thought process is that they are interdimensional, they're demonic, they're not from another planet, they're ultra terrestrial, but they can shift between our dimension and theirs. But when they shift into ours, they can be harmed. When they shift back, they can't, but you can hurt them. And he's got a very, very interesting story. I'm not going to tell anyone it's 100% true. I can't verify anything. He doesn't have any receipts like Gene has documentation, but definitely, definitely an interesting story. Very similar to Snyder's story of what happened to him at Dulce Base. And he's been talking about this for over 25 years. He's been on Coast to Coast several times. So he'll be with us tomorrow night at 7 p.m. So if you're interested, please, go up top, max engage with that post so people know about it. It's definitely going to be an interesting evening. Um, and let's just say he's a very interesting gentleman. So you don't want to miss that space. It should be interesting and a little fun and a little scary. Go ahead, Susie.
Hey, I just have to say something real quick about what you just said. There was somebody where I live, in the state I live, that was attacked by some sort of dog creature recently in the last like month or two. So anyway, that's kind of wild that you said that. But anyway, Gene, so I'm curious, and this is Miss A kind of like alluded to a little bit of this. So you've only been putting this out for a certain amount of time. Obviously, some of the kickback has been you being ignored. But have you gotten that much resistance to what you're putting out, as far as people attempting to discredit you in any way or anything like that? Or, uh, yeah. So.
Yeah, so there's been attempt. I mean, discredit in so much as people are like, oh, he published it as a book. I don't like the cover. Nobody knows who this guy is. That there's nobody. Again, it's pseudoscience. Okay, well, what? Nobody's structured in a nobody has structured or put forward to me a intellectual argument or position that that I've been able to assess, right? So I know there's a lot of people slamming it and just thinking it's ridiculous or a psyop or a grifting thing or whatever. I mean, anytime I do see something and have the opportunity to address anyone's criticism, I try to do it again just in a way that explains the position of either how I reached a conclusion, right? And again, stressing that it's my conclusion, but again, all of the documents are there for somebody to go reach their own and put it together. Like I said, some people said, well, the aliens told them that it operates this way. Okay, I can't, if that's what the aliens told you, I can only tell you what I have here in the documents. And when people, again, get more, let's say, aggressive in the pursuit, all I can say is, all right, well, then show me your math. Let's compare. You're saying it's one way. My father-in-law says it. Show me what you have, and I'll look at it and I'll compare the two things. And maybe you're right. I don't know if you don't show me what you have, but you just yelling at me and telling me what you know doesn't fucking mean anything to me, right? So it all comes down to, whatever it is. Look, all the documents are there. Every single page, there's 3 or 4 different ways everybody can access every page of it. And you can totally ignore every word that comes out of my mouth and go draw whatever conclusion you want. People like use Grok and they put it in and they're like, tell me what kind of bullshit this is. And Grok will come back and tell you what kind of bullshit it is. And they try to use that like again, the way they phrase the question gives them the answer that they want to get out of it. To which, again, I'm just able to go back if I had so desired and, correct it. So again, nobody's substantively come back and been like, this is ridiculous and this is why it's ridiculous. And your father-in-law was crazy.
I do.
And
Oh,
people that have come back with quite the opposite, as you heard earlier from Jay.
well, I do want to say your cadence and also what I sense of humility and also how you present the information is very helpful because you're not saying this is the facts, I mean, you're like, here I have information, this was presented, this is what I'm sharing, this is what I understand. And to me, that helps circumvent those types of attacks upon you. Now granted, obviously you're going to get them because people are going to want to be right, and so I just want to say that's what I sense from you is some definite, you seem to be very genuine to me, and I appreciate that very much.
Oh, thanks. And again, I credit my intel background, right? My job was, I collected information, I analyzed, I processed, and what I did with that was then hand it off to the decision makers for the decision makers to make a decision about that. Now, there's times I certainly had to explain it. I had to, I really believed in some things and had to, reiterate. And I've just always been in this, it's in my DNA now after almost 20, almost 30 years, of just trying to, constantly challenge myself and being open to the challenges and, being ready to be disappointed. If, on those things that like I really think I got it right, but I never think I'm 100% right.
Yeah, as you've said, it's great to be open. It's that's one thing I've learned. It's like I like being proved wrong, sometimes, but at the same time, sometimes there's certain things we do know within ourselves. So,
Yeah, and that's why. So, one of I tell the story. One of my first lessons in intelligence was my handler, let's say, gave me this question. He said, you're walking through a field and you come upon a fence post and a wooden fence post, and there's a turtle on top of the fence post. He goes, what do you do? And like now I'm thinking, well, am I being observed? And somebody had to have put it there. Where is that person? Why did they put it there? Or did they put it there because they wanted to draw my eye to it? And I'm running down and through all the analytics of coming across this turtle on a fence post. And when I was done, he said, you're wrong. He said, the only thing you need to do as you're walking along and you see that turtle on the fence post is you just need to recognize something's fucking wrong. He said, and then as you continue on, everything, you're now in the right mindset that something is wrong, and every other piece of information that begins to come to you, you have to take that within that context of something's wrong. I don't know what, but my job wasn't to resolve why that turtle was on the fence post. It is, that I'm on another mission, So similarly, I might not be 100% right. I might, but I've done this long enough that I'm comfortable. I'm in the ballpark.
Thank you, Gene. We're going to go to our last question. Miss A, go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. Hey, Jean, what discipline of intelligence were you in?
So I was, as I explained it earlier, my role was so purely, if I had to categorize it, it's analytical, right? But I performed a lot of operational type activity. So my primary focus was critical infrastructure threat, critical infrastructure protection. The general job title I used was geopolitical and transnational security risk management focused on critical infrastructure. That included both operational and analytical type activities that fed into the agencies proper that were interested.
Pop question, just a bonus. How does that differ from geospatial intelligence?
So geospatial intelligence is like the David Grush stuff, your sensors, your data, this and that. Geopolitical is the assessing what it is that a leader is going to do based upon not only their track record, but the location, the geography of the nation itself that you're observing. So that ultimately, world leaders can talk and say what they want, but there are very practical decisions that they have to come to based upon where they are. So the best example I always give is Switzerland is not neutral because the King of Switzerland was a peace-loving, wonderful human being who didn't like war. Switzerland is neutral as a matter of its geography and its geopolitics, that if it did not take a position of neutrality, it would have been absorbed and transferred for hundreds of years between conflicting nations. He made the smart geopolitical decision to be neutral.
Okay, can you just give me a quick summary of what geospatial intelligence does?
Outside of what I just said, sort of the sensors, I've never been involved in it, so I really don't know. My understanding of
Fair enough.
geospatial,
Fair
yeah,
enough.
yeah, I never dealt with it, so I know the term. I know generally. Yeah, I know generally what they do. Yeah, I mean, I know it's like the sensor data and radar data and shit like that. I never got involved with any of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miss A. All right, folks, this is where we're going to end the space. So I'll leave it here. This isn't about proving anything. It's about understanding what's actually in front of us. And when documents like this exist and Gene would bring them forward, they don't just answer questions, they create bigger ones. And Gene, when your documentary is ready to go, I'd be glad to push that out for you or have you back maybe to kick it off as a premiere. Just let me know anything I could do to help you out with getting the information out. I'd love to help you, Gene. So just let me drop me a DM, or you give you my number, or I'll text you my number. I know I have your number. So anything I could do for
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for the questions and everything. And again, I try to be on spaces a lot to be available if there's anything that comes up, and you can reach out anytime.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gene.
Yeah, thank you, Gene. Thank you, Mav.
Oh, you're welcome. Appreciate having you, Gene. Thank you for the time. This is what Tailspin's all about. I try to bring good conversation. We're here 7 days a week, 365. Actually, yesterday was a year of running the spaces 7 days a week. 1 year, I can't believe it. Whew. I never thought it would happen. First, I didn't think I could actually do it, but here we are a year later.
Quite
But
the
Gene,
stamina, old man.
oh, leave that our Friday night space after dark at 9 p.m. Thanks, Miss A. Miss A is a co-host of mine for our Tailspin After Dark episode We do that on Fridays at 9 p.m. Gets a little spicy, not like this space, but you know what's Friday? We can't be serious all the time on everything, so we get a little bit loose on Friday nights. So if anyone's interested, swing by. It's always entertaining, and it's never me. It's my co-host. I'm gonna throw it out to my co-host. So I have Miss A and I have Sarah Beth. So most of you know Sarah Beth. She co-hosts me on Friday night. It's a fun space. But everyone, thank you for pulling up here tonight. Because if it wasn't for you, we would not have a space. And I enjoy running these things. And thanks again, Gene. Everybody have a good night. See you all tomorrow.